Hello, my name is Bill Shaner. I'm a local journalist here in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I write the newsletter Worcester Sucks and I Love It. Today, I am trying a new thing. This is the inaugural episode of a video journalism, video essays, putting them on YouTube, putting them on the Rewind Video Club Patreon, where I take some of my work from Worcester Sucks and adapt it to a new format. And I'm excited to give this a try, and I'm excited to be using Rewind Video as a sort of cute little studio setting for this. Why not? Rewind Video Club presents. So the idea with these essays is taking some of my work on Worcester in Worcester Sucks and I Love It and adapting it to a new form and focusing more on sort of general themes than the news of the day. For instance, today I want to talk about the incoming Supreme Court decision on homelessness, which we're expecting in mid-June, and how that will impact cities, Worcester being one of those cities. And it's a subject that is confusing, and there's a lot to it. And I think the video essay format is good for breaking that down and making it more digestible, because how cities police their unhoused populations is complicated, and it's a lot more complicated than the sort of coverage that we're reading about the Supreme Court. And as we'll get to, it's more complicated than Supreme Court justices understand themselves. So I want to take us through all of it, through what this grants pass decision is, how cities police their unhoused populations, how they could do better by them, and how things are probably going to get a whole lot worse. So let's get to it. So full disclosure time, I have never done this before, and I don't think I'm particularly good at it. And my first attempt at this, I was just reading off the screen, and it was really obvious that I was just reading a script, but my name is anyway, it was really obvious I was just reading off a script, so I'm going to try to not do that. But if you see me looking back and forth like this a lot, it's because, I am a written word guy. I'm not a video guy, so yeah. So anyway, what is Grants Pass versus Johnson, the Supreme Court case that is going to have a ruling in June and had oral arguments in April that were pretty revealing. We'll get to some of the oral arguments later, but first we need to have a good, solid understanding of what this case is. So, Grants Pass is a small city in Oregon, and in 2018, a civil lawsuit was filed on behalf of unhoused residents there about a particular municipal ordinance that the city was employing against unsheltered, unhoused people in the city. And the city does not really have infrastructure like Worcester does and many cities do for even temporary emergency homeless shelters. Nevertheless, the city banned the use of stoves and sleeping bags and pillows in public places, basically making it a finable offense to sleep outside, but with like weird caveats for people who are napping. You can't get a ticket for napping if you have an apartment or house to go back to, but if you don't have an apartment or house to go back to and you have a pillow with you, then you can get a ticket for napping, sleeping overnight. It's a $500 ticket if you are caught with your eyes closed in a public park and it looks like you plan on sleeping there for a while. The federal court that first heard that civil suit deemed this ordinance cruel and unusual punishment under the Constitution's 8th Amendment. And they did so because an important caveat: if unhoused people have nowhere else to go, meaning they can't find shelter or an apartment or anywhere else to go besides sleeping outside, it is cruel and unusual punishment to fine people for the act of sleeping outside. In its ruling, the court wrote that, quote, Uprooting homeless individuals without providing them basic sanitation and waste disposal needs does nothing more than shift a public health crisis from one location to another, potentially endangering the health of the public in both locations. Relevant to Worcester and a lot of cities, this lower federal court attacked quality of life laws directly. This is an example of a quality of life law. It's, laws that treat unhoused people like unregistered cars and illegally dumped garbage and stuff like that. The stuff that impacts the quality of life of people who have homes or apartments. This court said that these quality of life laws erode the little trust that remains between homeless individuals and law enforcement officials. Such laws lead to confrontations and contribute to a cycle of incarceration and recidivism, the court ruled. Grants Pass, the city of Grants Pass, city government did not like this. Since this decision, they have pushed for a Supreme Court hearing over and over. They argued in a brief that the Eighth Amendment has no bearing on what a crime can be in the first place. Essentially, they argued that, unsheltered homelessness should be a crime. They've been encouraged by other cities, red and blue. This is sort of a bipartisan consensus that we should be able to criminalize sleeping outside. California Governor Gavin Newsom, for instance, big supporter of Grants Pass. State governments in Idaho, Montana, Nebraska, and Los Angeles is in there too. Cities and states across the country really want these ordinances that allow them to levy fines and penalties on people who are sleeping outside. So the Supreme Court decision that's coming in June will either preserve this sort of tepid protection that it is cruel and unusual punishment to issue fines to people sleeping outside. Essentially, is it cruel and unusual punishment to overtly criminalize not having a roof over your head? Or they could rule with the city and say that it's neither cruel nor unusual. And in fact, cities should be encouraged to have municipal ordinances where they can do this sort of stuff. So this ruling comes, and it's gotten a lot of press attention because homeless populations across the country are rising rapidly. Let's see here. From a recent HUD study, the headline data point is that homelessness increased nationwide by 12%. From 2022 to 2023, they do something called a point-in-time count, which every city has to do. They basically go out and at a single point in time count how many unhoused people there are in the city. This is the highest spike since they started doing these point-in-time counts back in 2007. So it's never been this much of a spike since we've been recording it, although we haven't been recording it for very long. In that report, there's another data point that's more to the point here with this Supreme Court decision, that the overall homelessness population increased by 12%, but the amount of available emergency shelter beds increased by only 7%, which is less than 12. And the amount of permanent supportive housing units, which are not, you have to show up, wait in line for a shelter. It's like a place that you have a key to, and it's that's where you live. That only increased by 6%. And so we have a situation here where homelessness has risen almost double at the rate that our capacity to house homeless people in either a temporary or long-term capacity. So that's really important when the Supreme Court is ruling on, whether it's cruel and unusual punishment to fine, ticket, and arrest people who have nowhere else to go. Because as we're seeing, there's, 12 minus 7% is 5% of this increase in homeless populations. Literally don't have a place to go. Shelters are full. In Massachusetts, it's a huge deal. In Worcester, it's a huge deal. Shelters are at capacity. They're over capacity. There's a deficit of available beds. But nevertheless, cities like Grants Pass pursue these sort of punitive policies that crack down on people sleeping outside, even if those people have nowhere else to go. So for someone sleeping outside, This means catching fines all the time that they probably can't pay and very likely often don't pay. And when you don't pay a fine, that generates a warrant. And when a warrant is generated, the cops can then arrest you and put you back in the court system and put you back in jail. And then you go to jail, and then once you get out of jail, you don't have any money, you don't have any place to go, you get fined for sleeping outside, you get another warrant, you go back to jail. So this is what that lower court was talking about with the sort of cycle of punitive punishment and recidivism and incarceration. It's cracking down on homelessness in this way might keep somebody from sleeping in a park one night, but it sort of serves the long-term, larger project of making sure that homeless people stay homeless, and that more people fall into homelessness, and once they fall into homelessness, they stay there. It's really counterproductive if the desired goal is to solve homelessness, end it, get everybody into a home. If that's your goal, this sort of stuff doesn't help. If your goal is punishment, it's great. So what is the Supreme Court going to do? Well, we're expecting a decision in June, and a couple of weeks ago in late April, they had their oral arguments. The way this works is, everyone comes together and, oh, the ambulance sound. The way this works is everyone sort of comes together, the prosecution makes their case, the defense makes their case, the Supreme Court justices ask their questions, and then they, a couple of months after that, they come out with their decision. We are expecting a bad decision on this one. The consensus after these oral arguments is that the Supreme Court is going to vote pretty much along ideological lines, conservative, liberal, 6-3, maybe, in favor of the city's right to fine people for sleeping outside. While the liberal justices were sympathetic to the plight of unhoused people, the conservative justices in these oral arguments, which I listened to, pretty much skipped right by the human being question and focused on sort of legal minutia. They asked a lot about whether homelessness is a status legally or if it's conduct. Are you doing a homeless or are you being a homeless? And they tossed out all sort of manner of strange hypotheticals and analogies. For instance, Chief Justice John Roberts asked, is being a bank robber a status? Or is being a bank robber conduct? Are bank robbers the same thing as unhoused people? Justice Neil Gorsuch asked whether there's a right for people to shit and piss outside, which is just weird, So the oral arguments made it clear that most justices really have only a very dim understanding of homelessness, the way cities respond to homelessness, and how it functionally works. Justice Samuel Alito, for instance, he asked, does it matter whether the person grew up in the town or not? Like, does it matter? Does the cop check the hospital that these people were born in before they issue a ticket for sleeping outside? I mean, it's a ridiculous question, and that's kind of like the rhetoric we hear locally in Worcester. Our more conservative counselors are always saying, like, yeah, it's the towns are coming in, dropping off unhoused people because we got all the services. It's like, it's a bad faith sort of line of argument. The funniest part, I think, Justice Clarence Thomas, 2 hours into this thing, like it's wrapping up, and he asks, quote, is there an ordinance here that says to be homeless is a crime? Like, geez, dude, thank you for joining us. That is the entire thing that we've been talking about for 2 hours. And the attorney for the unhoused people that brought this case forward was like, yeah, that's exactly what you're saying when you ticket people for sleeping outside, pretty basic stuff. So these Supreme Court justices, they don't really seem to know much of anything about this monumental decision they're about to make, which is depressing. But it also really it won't, like, let me start over. It's not so much that this decision, even if they make the wrong decision, will change anything automatically. homelessness and response to homelessness is policy that's almost always meted out by municipalities and cities and city police departments and social services. It really, the federal law doesn't have much to do with how cities respond to and immiserate unhoused people. So if the court rules the way that everyone expects them to, it won't lead to any sort of immediate sweeping changes across the country, but it really just opens the door for cities so inclined to pursue more cruel and punitive solutions to this issue. That's most cities, including Worcester, but Worcester, as we'll see, is a good example of a way to understand that cities don't need an express anti-homelessness law to make homelessness illegal in their city. Without any law on the books that's even remotely similar to Grants Pass, Worcester has figured out how to make homelessness a de facto crime very easily. So to get into that, we sort of need to get into some social theory and some sociology, and this concept called the pervasive penalty. So what is pervasive penalty? I said pervasive penalty before, but it's actually penality. It is a series of police actions, laws, and other things that fall just short of arrests, but constitute a overall blanket response that might as well be an arrest and is in times worse than getting arrested. In a 2019 sociology paper titled Complaint-Oriented Policing, Regulating Homelessness in Public Space, the sociologist Chris Herring examined San Francisco's homeless population and response. He was embedded with both the police and unhoused communities for a period of time in writing this paper, and it's really good, and I found it to be remarkably similar to Worcester's. San Francisco is a pioneer of this sort of housing-first strategy and rhetoric as it relates to unhoused, and a lot of cities, including Worcester, have followed San Francisco's lead. So this pervasive penalty, it's essentially the process of criminalizing homelessness without saying so out loud. There doesn't need to be a direct law or ordinance on the books. The police use a combination of move-along orders, destruction of personal property, outstanding warrants, and the threat of arrest to move homeless people from where they happen to be. As Herring describes, it's a punitive process of police interactions that fall just short of arrest. What's up, Chris?
Hey, how's it going? Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. We'll take a break here. All right, that's the fun of recording these videos in a public place. You just have friends pop by and you stop recording and then you get back into it. So where were we? Herring describes it. It's a punitive process of police interactions that fall just short of arrest and are pervasive in both their frequency and lingering impact. Here in Worcester, as I've reported on a number of times, encampment sweeps are sort of a primary tool for this process. They're carried out routinely. Very rarely are they reported on unless it's a large encampment. And they're done through like a coercive process. They're not arrested, but they're forced along by the threat of catching a trespassing charge, or having their personal property deemed abandoned and thrown in the trash, and also having just their name run to see if they have any outstanding warrants. Unhoused people, especially unsheltered, single unhoused people, they tend to have outstanding warrants: drug possession, sex work, trespassing, disturbing the peace. The threat of being taken in on warrants is something that police can use to get homeless people to not be where they are. So there's a good quote here from Chris Herring in that article. He says, "The process also diminishes citizenship by cultivating a distrust not only of police, but of various state institutions of poverty management and the public at large." This is so many negative interactions like this. So many times your encampment has been swept. you start to see everyone from the state, even like a well-meaning social worker, as being somebody who's there to give you a hard time, to hassle you, and you get further disconnected from any sort of safety net that you might be able to find. Herring continues, even without overtly taking in punitive actions of arrest and incarceration, in what may appear a more compassionate approach to the problem, the failure to deal with root causes of homelessness leads city officials to develop short-term solutions that exacerbate the problems faced by the unhoused and fail to stop the seemingly endless flow of complaints. Worcester and San Francisco and most cities police their unhoused populations on a complaint-based model. Somebody calls in and complains about an unhoused person doing whatever, and the police feel duty-bound to resolve the complaint. Things that they wouldn't do on their own volition, they do because somebody asked them to. In San Francisco, this has led, as Herring notes in that story, to a new term that the cops use for when somebody calls the cops on a homeless person, but there's not really a crime being committed. They just log it as homeless concern, and they still have to respond even if the homeless person isn't doing anything wrong. And in San Francisco, as well as in Worcester, we're seeing increasingly these complaints have ramped up as cities have adopted 311 apps and have made it easier for people to file complaints with the city. As they make it easier to file complaints with the city, more people file complaints against unhoused people. Complaints also come from businesses and property owners. In Worcester, one of our most high-profile encampment evictions was one behind Walmart. And it turned out that Walmart was one of the complaining parties that initiated the encampment sweep. So you have Walmart calling the cops on homeless people, and the cops don't side with the homeless people who are residents of the city. They side with the Walmart, who wants them to be anywhere else but where they happen to be right then. So it's important to note that like the cops really don't want to be doing this work, and they actually loathe it. It's like Charlie work to them. They really don't want to be doing what they're doing, but the complaint-based model makes it so they have to. Herring's article has a couple dispatches from ride-alongs he did with the police officers there, and they're very revealing in what they said. He quotes one police officer saying, quote, "I can take a guy to a shelter, but it's only going to be for one night, and they're going to go back out onto the street. Some of these people are crazy or addicted, and that's like a disease. Who are we kidding and thinking they'll do well sleeping bunked with 200 other guys? Policing these folks doesn't do anything to get them off the streets. If anything, it keeps them there longer." So that brings us to sort of the central question of this whole thing. Do we want to solve homelessness, or do we want to punish homeless people? Which is more important? Are we adopting things that might one day lead to a solution to this understandably difficult issue, like, say, building more public housing and making housing more affordable? Or do we want to create a new underclass and make a just pervasive criminality and expand the punitive responses? In some parts of the country, notably, the punitive responses are gaining major traction, and it's very worrying in a way that I wish more people were talking about. I mean, in Florida, they're talking about like straight up camps, internment camps, on an island, for instance, in Miami. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is in support of the camps, saying that we need these camps to ensure that people's property values are maintained. So here we have in the logic, the freedom of people to exist is less important than the value of people's property. So this roundabout strategy was also laid out by the guy who's gonna probably be our next president. In April, he posted a video to Truth Social where he laid out a loose plan, this is Donald Trump, of course, to relocate unhoused people to tent cities on, quote, inexpensive tracts of land. Trump said, when I'm back in the White House, we will use every tool, lever, and authority to get the homeless off our streets. Banning encampments outright. So you see, like, the Supreme Court ruling in favor of Grants Pass here opens the door for this to happen without any real way to challenge it. So we're looking at a real sort of slippery slope into nightmare city here. So he uses the language arresting anyone unless they accept treatment and services. And this is, as it works right now in Worcester, people don't get arrested if they don't accept treatment and services, but treatment and services are used as a sort of carrot dangled in front of the stick of relocating them from their encampment and sending them off to start a new encampment anywhere else in the city. It's like, oh, you can take us up on our services, and if you don't take us up on our services that we're offering, you got to leave. What services, though? What treatment? What services? There are almost no services. The services in Worcester are like 3 homeless shelters, temporary shelters, and like 20 units of permanent supportive housing. And we have a homeless population in the hundreds that's growing every day. People in power, from Trump down to like the Worcester police chief, will say, like, we try to offer these people services, but they don't get into what those services entail. And these services are bad. If the services were good, if they were a better alternative to sleeping outside in a tent, people would probably take them. But people don't take those services because they're not good or real services. So we don't. You see in this rhetorical logic, we don't talk about what these services are. We just take it for granted that there are services being offered to these people, and they're declining them. So it kind of puts the onus on the unhoused people themselves for just being stupid or negligent because they're not availing themselves of all these wonderful services. It's just a little rhetorical twist that makes the homeless people out to be the bad guy, not the structural factors of society that produce homelessness. This rightward drift towards increasingly cruel and punitive responses to homelessness across the country is, like most evil things, fueled and driven by a shadowy think tank. This time, the name of that think tank is the Cicero Institute, who in 2023, put out a policy report entitled A New Way on Homelessness, saying homelessness first has failed. We need to do things different. The bureaucrats are the problem. So there's a couple points to this plan. First one, naturally, is states should ban unauthorized street camping. So they're right in line with the Supreme Court on that one. Second one, states should direct funds away from expensive and ineffective housing first programs towards short-term shelter and sanctioned policed encampments. Policed being the operative word there. This is much like Donald Trump wants, tent cities that are under police surveillance and far away from anybody who has property value needing to be protected. Number 3, states and cities should pay nonprofits for performance, not just services. So we need to evaluate our nonprofits, blah, blah, blah. 4, states should amend civil commitment laws to make it easier to help those who cannot help themselves. That means make it easier to put people in prison against their will. Why not? So it's like the way this works is like this think tank puts these ideas into the ether, and they wiggle their way through the bureaucracies of state and federal government, and they find purchase among people who want to be more cruel. And it also serves to funnel more money to police departments, because really what this entails is just further policing the problem. There's nothing in this report about building more homes, So if this is the direction we're heading, it's the direction of making sure that it is much harder to get out of homelessness once you fall into it, and that the punishment inflicted on you once you reach that status in the legal sense is worse and worse. Straight to jail and making you stay there, basically. And that's the way this country appears to be heading. But there are a few sort of standout examples of being able to do this better, being able to actually have a proactive homelessness response that cuts down on the number of people sleeping on the street. Most cities, Worcester included, are moving in a direction of increasingly punitive responses to a growing homeless population within their borders. There are a few examples of cities across the country, and it's just a few, that are taking a more proactive approach and seeing success. One that's relevant to Worcester especially, given that it's roughly the same size, is Chattanooga, Tennessee, which sort of bucked the national trend and saw a 49% drop in homelessness over the period where the national increase was 12%. So in Chattanooga, negative 49. The nation on a whole, plus 12. They accomplished this with things that just like intuitively make sense. They had a three-pronged approach. Investing real money, public money, local money, into more permanent supportive housing units. They did a sanctioned encampment site where people can get connected to services and live outside, but live outside in a way that's sort of free from police persecution. And they increased their emergency shelter capacity. So increase, more long-term shelter, let people sleep outside if they have to in an environment that's safe and where they won't get punished for it, and also increase the amount of temporary shelters available to people if they need them on a given night. Just doing those three things really and throwing, real money at it has led to a 49% drop in their population. It's like, why isn't everywhere doing that? Why are we talking about concentration camps? So another example, and sort of like the standout around the country, is Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas has seen a 64% drop over the past couple of years in their population of unhoused people, with 17% of that coming from the past 3 years. They used to have 8,500 people on the street in a given night, and now that's at 3,200. And only 1,200 of those actually sleeping on the street and not in shelters on a given night. How did they pull this off? It's pretty simple. They put together a coordinated response that has a express stated first emphasis on getting people into their own apartments. That's it. Texas doesn't have a lot of money for homeless response. It's a red state, and Houston was able to do this without really throwing that much money at it. It was just the shift in priority from dedicating resources towards making sure that you can remove homeless people from where you don't want them to be, and pushing those resources towards providing them a home. It's really that simple. The way that you solve homelessness in America is you make more homes. More homes, less people are homeless. I mean, so it really it raises a difficult question. Why doesn't everywhere do this? Why doesn't Worcester do this? Why are we doing routine encampment sweeps and not investing in permanent supportive housing or more shelter sites? So why isn't every city in the country taking the approach that Chattanooga and Houston have taken and have shown to be successful? Why aren't we doing better? Why isn't a place like Worcester, which is the same size as Chattanooga, doing the things that Chattanooga is doing? And really the question boils down to political will. We don't want to. We just want to be able to call the cops on homeless people if their presence is inconvenience to us. This is more important than providing homes and solving the problem. while Chattanooga and Houston invested in both, permanent supportive long-term housing and temporary shelter sites and sanctioned encampments to increase the amount of safe options available for unhoused people to lift them out of their situation, in Worcester, we operate on a false dichotomy. We say that permanent supportive housing is better than temporary shelter sites, but we don't build a lot of permanent supportive housing. It's been 5 years since a 2018 plan to build 100 units of permanent supportive housing in Worcester, and we've built some 20, maybe 21. And meanwhile, the number of unsheltered homeless people in Worcester continues to climb. We don't build temporary shelter sites because we say that permanent supportive sites are better. But we're not building permanent supportive sites either. So what we have is just a stalled response on both levels, because the political will is that temporary shelters can't happen, and that's because people don't want to live near them. And the political will is that, permanent supportive housing sounds nice, but we don't want to pay for it. We don't want to expedite it. We don't want to build more of it. We don't want to take out municipal bonds to do it. So the projects take years, and some of them might never come online. So what we have here is the political will to do none of the proactive responses that we should be doing. And meanwhile, in the background, as quietly as possible, the police continue to carry out the business of responding to complaints and shuffling the homeless population around the city, one encampment at a time, making life more difficult for the unhoused people that they're shuffling around, and making it harder for them to get out of their situation. They're treated like blight. They're treated like garbage. And in Worcester and in many places, the task force, police task force that responds to blight and garbage, like unregistered vehicles and illegally dumped trash and mattresses and such, is the same police force that responds to homeless complaints. So, as the population of homeless people around the country grows, and it grows here in Worcester, and there's really no reason to think that it will stop growing as the affordable housing crisis worsens and cities have lower vacancy rates and no affordable housing is being built, we're left with a central question here, a really dark central question. Do we want to see homeless people get into homes, or do we just want to not see them? Becoming increasingly clear that we're willing to accept that the problem is the people experiencing homelessness. And we don't want to solve homelessness so much as we want to punish the people that are homeless. And that leads us down a dark path, leads us nowhere good. And it needs to change. And that change starts at the local level. Homelessness is a municipal issue, beholden to the political will of a municipality and how that political will informs the decisions of its city hall. More than most issues, homelessness is a municipal issue. It's a local government issue. And in order for any change to happen, the political will of municipalities needs to change. And it needs to be more about helping people get out of homelessness, solving the problem, building more housing, building better paths to housing, and less about making sure that homeless people are not near you. But the political will right now, homeless people being not near you is much more important than homelessness being solved. And that's a deeply embedded, difficult thing to change. But it's the issue of our times in many ways, and I don't see a way in which it gets any better. So, thank you. That's it. That's my first video essay for the Rewind Video Club Presents series, and I think it went okay. I don't know. Let me know what you think, and thank you everyone for watching.